Today's show was recorded live at The Refinery, Charleston's hub for creative industry. Go to therefinerychs.com to get events, venue, and contact information. Now on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome to the Shrimp City Report. I'm Devin, and I am here today with my co-host and my co-son, or actually my son, not a co-son, DJ. How are you doing, dude?
Arg.
Are you giving
just jumping in, to the spirit of things.
Kind of giving a premonition or whatever of what we might be talking about today.
Yeah, talk about some history, yeah.
Right. And you're not like a linguist that specializes in the Arabic letter R.
Mm-hmm.
You are referring to our friend that stopped by, Christopher Downey, also known as Captain Byrd. And he is can we call you a pirate expert, or what are we going to call?
I mean, I've been telling everyone that we were interviewing a pirate expert for the past 3 weeks, so.
It might be optimistic to say I'm a pirate expert, but I know a few things about pirates, yes.
Yeah. You've written 2 books now, 3 books?
Two books exclusively about Charleston and pirates in Charleston, and then my third book, which is about Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe's kind of contribution to Charleston and to his literature was a pirate story. So the pirate theme continued on into my Poe book as well. So yes.
Oh, well, that's actually a great segue and transition. I guess the gold bug.
The gold bug, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually the most successful financially and copies sold in Poe's lifetime was the gold bug. Today, Telltale Heart, The Black Cat, those are more popular. But in his time, by far, his best-selling short story was The Gold Bug.
Chris, how long have you been in Charleston for?
I moved here in 2001, so that's 24 years.
Okay.
So, yeah, my job moved me here in 2001, and I couldn't be happier.
Okay, what originally brought you to Charleston then?
So I work in the maritime industry, and I was working in Virginia at the Port of Richmond, which the city of Richmond is a very tiny port.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was, I worked for a container ship company that called the Port of Richmond, that doesn't call there anymore, and then I moved from Richmond to Norfolk and worked on the waterfront there on kind of the bigger ships. And then that job moved me down to Charleston to work on the waterfront here in Charleston in July of 2001.
It's funny you mentioned maritime because when I did some research, one of my favorite parts about your website is your little anecdote about you riding on your boat. Do you still have that boat?
I don't actually.
Are you still a sailor to this day?
I sold that boat 1 year ago exactly and bought a new boat that is a little bit bigger. And yes, but I had that boat for many years. I gave the pirate tours on that boat, and we just sold it last August. So we have a new one.
So were you familiar with Charleston beforehand, before you actually moved?
A little bit, yeah. When I was a kid, I don't know if you remember the mini-series, The North and South, with Patrick Swayze.
Yeah.
I don't know, for whatever reason, when it's a 12-year-old,
that's over my age range.
Yeah, 58, I remember it well.
It was a fairly cheesy miniseries on TV, and Patrick Swayze. And anyway, it was set, most of it here in Charleston.
Yeah.
And so I became very intrigued and interested in Charleston, even as I think I was 12 years old then or something. And, when the opportunity came to move to Charleston, I knew in my heart, even when they mentioned it, that it was the right place for me somehow. And it's turned out great. I love Charleston. So,
did you always have this connection with boats and all that stuff? And
I did. Yeah. I've always loved boats. And, my first real purchase as a kid was a canoe to canoe on the Appomattox River, which ran by my house. And just always really been interested in boats and the maritime industry. And the only job I've ever had since I graduated college is in the maritime industry. So,
okay.
Well, that's interesting. So, did you grow up in the Richmond area? Is that where you're from?
I grew up a little south of Richmond. It's actually Virginia's smallest city. It's called Colonial Heights, and yes, that's where I grew up.
Yeah, but you're you're ground zero of history, especially the war between the states and so much revolutionary stuff done down there. Although I think the most battles happened in South Carolina, but I may be mistaken.
American Revolution, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Civil War, certainly Virginia,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, in the summertime in college, I even worked at Petersburg National Battlefield, which is basically where the last year of the Civil War was fought in and around. And I tell people today, when I was a kid, there was all kinds of old fortifications and earthworks around where I grew up. And you could literally just walk in the woods and just kick up the dirt and you'd find like musket balls and bullets and things because there's just so much activity in and around that area, particularly the last year of the Civil War. So, yeah.
Okay.
Hey, everyone. We really want to encourage you to visit the refinery in Charleston, South Carolina. The refinery is a beautiful mixed-use facility that's home to upscale office space, 2 restaurants, the Limbo Lounge, and an amphitheater that hosts national, regional, and local acts year-round. We cannot recommend it enough. Go to therefinerychs.com to get event and venue information. You can also go to the site to learn how you can even book the spaces you want for your own event. So go check them out, and thanks.
So do you think it was one of those things where you were just surrounded by the history that kind of brought you into that aspect of life, or were you like generally had like interest from the start?
Yeah, I think certainly living there helped, but my mom also was a history teacher. She was a public school teacher for 40 years, so it was kind of in the house all the time. But yeah, I always loved history, and certainly when I was young, the Civil War was kind of my sweet spot in history. But I've kind of grown over the years to kind of enjoy other aspects of American history, particularly.
Okay, so you moved to Charleston, working in maritime, have that history love. What was that final, I guess, inspiration that made you want to start getting into writing?
So it all started with a boat, actually. I moved to Charleston in 2001, and I just had like this little like Carolina skiff. And in 2003, I bought a new boat, which was like your standard Charleston Boy center console, the one that everyone has in Charleston. It was a great boat. Enjoyed it, but I really wanted to get a boat that I could cruise in, something bigger, something I could do like overnight trips in. And I couldn't think of a way to justify in my brain to spend the money to buy another boat because I really had just only bought this new center console a couple of years before that. And then one night I was like laying in bed thinking about it. I was like, what if I gave tours on the boat to help offset the cost of the boat? Long story short, I went to the Maritime Center. And I spoke to the guy that was the manager there, and I was like, look, could I give boat tours and pick up and drop off customers here at the Maritime Center? And he was like, yeah, we'll charge you, $25 a trip, this, whatever. And we made a deal, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get my captain's license. I'm going to buy this boat. I'm going to do the whole thing. And then as I was leaving, he was like, look, the deal is you can do this, but you can't be in direct competition with any other tour boats that come to the Maritime Center.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Charleston.
And I was like, uh-oh. And I was like, well, what do you have? And he was listing. He was like, we've got Civil War. We've got American Revolution. We've got Ghost Tour. He had everything you could think of. And I was like, oh, boy, I think I'm in trouble. And then I thought, wait, do you have pirates? And he said, no, actually, we don't have pirates. And I was like, that's it. I'm the pirate guy. I'll give pirate boat tours. And then long story short is on one of those pirate boat tours, I met an editor from a local publisher here in Charleston. And she said, have you ever thought about writing a book about Stede Bonnet? And I said, no, not at all. She's like, look, send me like 2,000 or 3,000 words. If we like it, we'll send you a contract. If not, then just forget about it. So I did. I wrote 2,000 or 3,000 words. I sent it in. Nothing for like, I don't know, almost 2 months. And then one day I went to my mailbox and here was a contract. And I was like, holy cow, I'm writing a book about Stede Bonnet. And that's how I got started. So,
dude, that's amazing. Yeah. So you had a eureka moment.
I did.
I mean, like my latest eureka moment was I'm going to order a new bird feeder. And I'm not even going to write a book about it.
You have.
That's pretty amazing. And okay, so Charleston, DJ will agree, and we've talked to some tour guides before. This is an aggressive market for tourism of that sort.
Yeah, and I guess, to that point, I did have a question. Like, Charleston is so willing to preserve that culture, the initial history. And I was wondering if that does aid, I guess, an inspiration for writing, especially for a historian.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the landscape of tourism has changed in Charleston. There was when I've got started, you had to pass a test through the city of Charleston, both written and oral, in order to get your tour guide license. And then, someone basically went to the South Carolina Supreme Court and said, this isn't fair. This is against free speech, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They won. And so no longer do you have to be required to do that. That maybe has lent itself to maybe some sketchy history being passed on, I guess, in Charleston. But
are you saying the lizard man isn't real?
Well, I mean,
or some rogue.
Some rogue.
Some outlaw history.
Outlaw history, yeah.
When I got started, you had to have a tour guide's license, but not lots of people, but some people would just literally go downtown and approach tourists and say, I'll give you a tour of Charleston for free.
Yeah.
And that way they could bypass. But then at the end they would say, I think a $20 tip would be fair.
Yeah, sure.
And that's how they would do it. But, there's some really good tours out there and some really good history, but there's also lots of stuff that maybe is not so good. But
no, I think I'm a proponent with the way Charleston does it now. We have talked to other tour companies and other folks that do events like that. And I mean, you do want people that are knowledgeable about it.
Absolutely.
I don't want to go on a tour of Charleston to get a subreddit.
Right, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do lots of book signings, not as many as I used to, but when my books first came out, especially, so I would literally, my publisher would send me somewhere like in front of a museum or somewhere, a bookstore, and I would sit out on the sidewalk and just sign books. People come by. And in that time, for those 2 or 3 hours, 50 tours would walk by and I would listen in, and, one would be a completely different story than the next one, the next one. So, but most of the reputable tourist companies still want tour guides that have taken that test, passed that test, and or know what they're talking about. So
once you did the 2,000 words or whatever you did for the publisher, were you still giving tours at that time?
I was still giving just boat tours at that time. And I was still giving tours, and Stede Bonnet,
Yeah, I mean, jumping into Stede Bonnet, your first book, I guess the most anti-pirate you can think of, almost.
Yeah, certainly. I think when I wrote it, the title that I submitted was History's Most Unlikely Pirate. They didn't take it. They made it Charleston's Gentleman Pirate, but certainly I thought of him. I really like Stede Bonnet in that he's kind of the everyman pirate. Everyone kind of has fantasies about being a pirate, maybe, watching the Johnny Depp movies, things like that. But, the reality is someone like me or you or any of us becoming a pirate with no experience, like a Stede Bonnet, it all goes horribly wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And, it would probably go horribly wrong for all of us. If we,
I would argue that he might be one of the most exploited pirates, too, in the world.
Yes. Yes, certainly. Yeah, certainly I think one of the most misunderstood pirates, certainly, but definitely one of the most unlikely pirates.
So I guess for any general listeners, can you give a brief summary of Stede Bonnet?
Yeah, sure. So Stede was a third generation sugarcane plantation owner in Barbados. At the time, so we're talking, he was born in 1689 is our best guess. At the time, Barbados was unquestionably the most profitable of the colonial possessions of Great Britain at the time.
Okay.
In fact, the first settlers that came to Charleston, they sent them to Barbados first to observe and learn, and said, look, go to Barbados and then just basically learn from them and then take that to Charleston and replicate it. Sugarcane didn't work in Charleston. Rice became the cash crop, but Barbados was the most successful, most profitable of the possessions. And Stede was a third generation. He had hundreds of acres of sugarcane plantations already. Large slave force. He had at least 2 windmills. They would use windmills to crush the sugarcane to get the syrup out to make the sugar. He married well. He married Mary Allenby, whose father was in the Colonial Assembly, and as part of the dowry, he got more acreage. So he was a very wealthy man that, for whatever reason, decided
the call of the sea, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's several theories. Some say that the funnest one is that his wife was a nag and that she drove him into piracy. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe he had a midlife crisis, even though he was only in his 20s. But It's hard to say. The truth is probably he was politically motivated to become a pirate. He was a Jacobite, which I don't want to bore you with a bunch of monarch history of England, but long story short was at that time during the Glorious Revolution of 1688, there was a king, James II, who was deposed. There was a Catholic, and they made a move to make sure that only a Protestant would be on the throne in England. They basically invited William of Orange, basically from what would have been Dutch at that time, who was married to Mary to become the king and queen, so to have Protestants on the throne. But this deposed king had a son named James Francis Stuart, who many people believe should be the rightful heir to the throne, but he was Catholic. And so there was many supporters both in England, in Great Britain, as well as in what would be the Americas that supported this guy. And Stede was certainly one of those people. And we call those people Jacobites.
Okay.
And probably for Stede, becoming a pirate was motivated by his intention of somehow using a force, a maritime force. There were fears in London at the time that there was always these Jacobite invasions all the way into the 1750s where the Jacobites would try to enter into England to retake the throne. Yeah. And there was fears in Parliament that they would be supported by a pirate navy in order to do that, because most pirates were, in fact, Jacobites. Charles Vane, for example, was a Jacobite. Yeah. We know Stede was because Stede's talks about it in his testimony during his trial here in Charleston, but also the vessel that he sailed on was called the Revenge, but later he renamed the Royal James in honor of James Francis Stuart, this would-be king.
Okay. So he decides to take off.
Yeah.
Did he have a plan in mind? Did he have a boat or anything?
Was it well researched?
No. He took the strange non-pirate step of actually building his own pirate ship. He built a Bermuda sloop, which is a popular vessel among pirates at that time. He put 10 cannon on it, and he actually hired his own crew. So, instead of, having a group of pirates sign articles and join on to your crew, he actually paid his crew like a salary.
He was known for his practices or foreign to a lot.
Absolutely, yeah.
The salary, and then I heard that he also read to them.
He read, yes. So he was a big reader. He had a library that in his home in Barbados, which, doesn't sound like a big deal now, but to have a library in your home in the early 1700s was certainly pretty impressive. And he took that library and built it into his pirate ship and took his library with him. So yes, he was. And I think he was aware that he had really no navigational experience. He didn't have any real experience sailing a ship or managing a crew on a ship. So he had to hire people in order to do that for him. And they pretty quickly realized that this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And things pretty much went downhill from day one for him. So.
But still, I admire that project manager, contractor kind of aspect of how he tried to do it.
Right.
Which probably, I'm sure it wasn't unheard of at the time, but that was pretty remarkable. And so when he set sail, you said he was a Jacobite. I know at that time there were certain letters of marque that would allow to attack English or just Spanish ships. Is that it? Or how did that work?
French.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so he didn't really take that tact at all. There were privateers that get letters of marque, which basically, there was a war from 1704 to 1714 that is called the War of Spanish Succession. Here on this side of the world, we call it a Queen Anne's War because Queen Anne was on the throne in England. And basically, it was a world war. It was fought largely here on this side of the world, but everywhere around the world. And England, as well as the people that we were fighting against, the England was fighting against, knew that they couldn't grow a big enough navy to cover all the water they needed to cover. So they would offer privateers these letters of marque. And basically it said, look, we authorize you to attack our enemy ships.
Okay.
You can have part of the plunder of whatever ships you capture. So basically it was legalized piracy.
Okay, so that's the difference between privateers
but people
and
like Blackbeard, before becoming the pirate that was Blackbeard, he was like a privateer fighting in that war where he had gotten a letter of marque and he was attacking. And so the development of the golden age of piracy basically came from when that war came to an end in 1714. all these guys that had been out fighting the Spanish and were legal pirates because they had these letters of marque suddenly were out of work because the war came to an end. And what do you do now? Well, they continued to attack Spanish ships, but then that turned into also attacking English ships. And then we grew into the golden age of piracy, and that's where Blackbeard and those come from. Stede's a little bit of an anomaly because his seems to be more, he just went into piracy because of his kind of his political ambitions, I guess.
Stede had some tie to Blackbeard, though, as well, right?
He did. So Stede, he becomes a pirate, so he sails out of Barbados, and he first comes to Charleston. And now he had told his crew pretty early on, look, I don't want to embarrass my family and the Bonnet family name in Barbados. Let everyone know that I'm a pirate. And so he asked to be at one point referred to as Captain Edward, at one point as Captain Thomas. So he comes to Charleston, and when he comes to Charleston, one of the very first ships that he captures offshore happens to be a ship coming from Barbados. And so when he goes on board, he's like, I'm, Captain Edward, I'm taking your ship. And the captain was like, I know who you are. You're Stede Bonnet. You're from Barbados. I'm from Barbados.
Right.
At the time, Charleston was full of people from Barbados. Yeah. And so his cover was blown pretty early. And after leaving Charleston, the crew was pretty much catching on. This guy doesn't know what he's doing, and he's not very good at this. And there was maybe some stirrings of a mutiny of some kind. So Stede felt compelled to kind of prove himself to the crew that he was a pirate captain and that he could handle himself. And so in the Florida Straits, he spotted a vessel and he ordered his crew to make the attack on the vessel. Unfortunately for Stede, it turned out to be a Spanish man of war, and he was outgunned terribly. Sure. He got shot up really bad. The Revenge nearly was sunk. Half the crew was shot up and killed. Stede himself was injured pretty badly. So afterwards, they were able to escape, and they went into Nassau, which was at that time the pirate haven of this side of the world. And his crew abandoned him. They just left him at anchorage on his shot-up new pirate ship, the Revenge, sitting in the harbor in Nassau. And it just so happened Blackbeard was in town at the same time, saw the ship, was in the market for a pirate ship himself, went out to go see Stede Bonnet. There is some evidence that maybe Stede and Blackbeard knew each other prior to that encounter. It's possible that one of his relatives, maybe an uncle even, was a servant, an indentured servant for the Bonnets in Barbados. So they might have had that link. But whatever their connection, Blackbeard convinces Stede to let him basically take command of Stede's vessel, get a new crew together, and go out pirating together. So Stede kind of becomes a co-captain on his own ship.
That's interesting because obviously we know where Stede ended, in Charleston. But I didn't know he had visited before, or was around this area before. I guess that shows how wide that expanse, like you said, that piracy expanse was.
Yeah. I mean, he was fairly successful along the East Coast when it was just him by himself prior to this unfortunate encounter with the Spanish man of war. It was pretty easy pickings. I mean, if you're a merchant vessel and you're passing up and down, particularly here in Charleston. I mean, Charleston at that time was a very wealthy, lucrative city, but it was far removed from just about anything else. I mean, you're hundreds of miles from any other really major city.
Right.
So
I was wondering about that. If it was, if it was off the beaten track or not.
Certainly, yeah. And, and Charleston also was a bit of an anomaly in the fact that it was a proprietary colony versus a royal colony. It was basically given as a gift to these 8 lord proprietors by King Charles II. The names that we have here like Berkeley and Ashley and Cooper, those are all names from those lord proprietors. And what it basically meant was that it was a real estate investment for these guys in the Carolinas. They would never live here, and they weren't under perhaps the direct protection of the Royal Navy. So it was easy pickings for pirates because there weren't any really Royal Navy ships here to protect Charleston.
Oh, okay.
So if you're a merchant passing by and a pirate comes at you, with 10 cannons and hoists up the black flag, you're going to surrender. It's pretty easy. So
the blockade in Charleston, did Stede and Blackbeard did that together?
They did do that together, yeah. So they went on kind of like this pirate tour through the Gulf of Mexico and then down to into the Caribbean towards the Sugar Islands. They got actually pretty close to Barbados, which probably made Stede pretty nervous. And then they came back up the East Coast and showed up here in Charleston in the spring of 1718. And so Stede was on board Blackbeard's ship. He had basically lost all command.
Okay,
So,
all right.
yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting. And so I guess he was scared to go by Barbados. Was it because he didn't want to see his mom, or is it just?
yeah.
Oh my God, she sees me out here pirate and she's
Call
just
back
gonna,
to his wife.
gonna
Yeah.
break her heart. Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I forgot he left a wife there.
Yeah, wife and kids.
Yeah.
So he was. Yeah, so I'm sure he was pretty nervous when they were, they were like in Nevis and some other sugar islands around that area. Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge was a slave trader, a French slave trader that he took off of Martinique. So that's where he actually got the Queen Anne's Revenge as and turned it into kind of his flagship, which he showed up here in Charleston with. So Stede would have been on board the Queen Anne's Revenge with Blackbeard during the blockade of Charleston.
So, not to demolish his efforts already, but when did it start going south?
So, things went pretty bad for Stede as soon as he signed on with Blackbeard. There's an article in a Boston newspaper. Pirate stories and pirate reports are very popular during this period.
Yeah.
And there's an interview with a captain of a merchant vessel that had been seized by the Revenge, by Stede's ship, but captained by Blackbeard. And in the report, the merchantman's captain says, we were seized by Blackbeard. He took this, this, and this. And then he basically says also on board was Stede Bonnet.
Mm-hmm.
But he was just on the deck walking around in his pajamas reading books, and he has no command. So,
God.
Blackbeard pretty much knew what he was getting with Stede and was, kind of took advantage of the guy. Yeah. So
that was pretty interesting. I mean, so my two biggest things are Treasure Island and what was it? Black Sails.
Yeah.
That was that was such a cool way to mix and match that. So,
yes.
So you started around 2001, you're going into that. So I hate to say you hit the crest of the pirate wave, right?
But, I mean, not just the pirate wave, but after that, especially within the past 10 years between Our Flag Means Death, all the YouTube videos.
Yeah, that's right.
Stede Bonnet is blown up.
Sure. He was in Outlander, which I never watched.
Yeah.
He shows up in Outlander. And then there's a video game, Assassin's Creed.
Yes. Yeah.
And he showed up in that. So it's interesting. I get reports of my book sales. And when that video came out, when Outlander was out, they spiked. And when Black Sails came out, I had my fingers crossed every episode. Stede was going to show up, and he never did.
Yeah,
they had everyone else but Stede. But yes, he certainly has had a bit of a renaissance.
What do you think? Is it just like, I don't know, the fact that he stands out from the crowd, that his unique characteristics that kind of drew people in?
I think so, yeah. I think the same things, when he was brought here to Charleston, when he finally got captured and he was brought to Charleston, he was wildly popular. The women were fond of him. Lots of people protested. They had to have armed guards to keep people from trying to spring him from jail when he was here. The fact that he was the gentleman pirate, he was well educated, he was a wealthy plantation owner. So, yeah.
It also kind of hits to that, that fantasy. Everyone wants to just drop everything and go sail the ends of the earth,
Yeah.
I imagine a lot of people kind of like reflected that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's also that Robin Hood thing, right? Because I'm sure people of lower economic strata are, I guess, making these stories more eloquent that, the man is getting their day, so, I'm sure there's a little bit of that going on.
And early Charleston too, people were fond of pirates in the early days. Times were tough here for settlers in Charleston. And, what's a pirate? A pirate is someone who goes and steals things on the high seas and then sells them at a reduced price. So, a pirate comes into Charleston is going to sell you something for half the price you'd normally pay. Hey.
And they're also spending their money in the local economy and stimulates that.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. It wasn't really until kind of the boom of rice and the wealth of the city that things started to change. People are like, okay, maybe these pirates aren't so good because they're starting to attack the goods that are returning from the sale of the rice that's coming into the city. So then, it kind of changed. But, for a while there, piracy was pretty popular.
Well,
so Stede's with Blackbeard. At what point does he go from that to his final destination, Charleston?
Yeah. So after the blockade of Charleston, Blackbeard makes a decision that he's going to retire from piracy. What he's going to do is what we talked about privateering is he approaches Stede and he says, look, I'm going to go to North Carolina and I'm going to surrender to the governor. At this point, King George I of England, King George had become the king during this period, has basically given this proclamation that's a pardon. And it says, look, if you're a pirate and you've been a pirate during this period, and there's some dates in there, if you promise not to do it again, we'll give you a pardon. It was basically the only way they could really deal with this real piracy problem, was to say, look, we won't hang you. You're free to go. Just don't do it anymore. And you could receive a pardon. So Blackbeard tells Stede after the blockade of Charleston, I'm going to go to North Carolina to the governor there, and I'm going to get the pardon. They sail up to what is Beaufort, North Carolina today. And as they're entering into Beaufort, North Carolina, the Queen Anne's Revenge runs aground. Now, there's some debate among historians that the Queen Anne's Revenge runs aground intentionally by Blackbeard, or was it an accident? Probably lean towards it was intentional. The idea being that Blackbeard was, at that point, had 400 to 500 pirates on 4 pirate ships. So he had a literal army of pirates. Yeah. He wanted to kind of liquidate the crew, go their separate ways, so maybe he ran it intentionally aground. So it runs aground. It becomes pretty clear that it's going to not be salvageable. So Blackbeard says to Stede, look, you go in and see the governor, get your pardon. I'm going to stay here and see the operation of getting everything off the Queen Anne's Revenge onto another boat. And when you come back, you and I will go together down to that. Their decision was to go to St. Thomas to get a privateering, a letter of marque to be privateers in St. Thomas. Stede goes in, he gets his pardon from the governor, and of course, when he comes back, he's been double-crossed by Blackbeard. Blackbeard has left with everything except for the revenge. He's left him the revenge, but it's completely empty. And Stede comes back to an empty ship, nothing on board, and he really has no choice but to return to piracy. So he literally was a free man and
literally just got a pardon, and it was like, well,
right in his pocket. And then he made a decision he would have to go back to piracy. So then he goes, he gets some of the former crew, and they go out and they go pirating again. And then he is in the Cape Fear River in the fall of 1718, and a little small merchant vessel is passing by, and they go into the Cape Fear River to get some fresh water and to make some repairs, and they get jumped by these pirates in the Cape Fear River. And they were on their way to Charleston. So when they get down to Charleston, they say to the authorities here in Charleston, hey, just so you know, we got jumped by some pirates in the Cape Fear River. They're sitting up in the Cape Fear River, and they actually have 2 prizes with them. So there's 3 ships up there, and we overheard them say that they are going to stay there through the hurricane season and then sail south to the Caribbean after the hurricane season. And so, of course, here in Charleston, everyone's got hurt feelings. They feel really upset about this whole Blackbeard incident where the city got blockaded. It was a big embarrassment. Charlestonians are very proud people. And so the decision is made, hey, let's go out and get these pirates. Let's get some revenge against these pirates. So they send a force up to the Cape Fear River under Colonel William Rhett, 2 vessels, the Henry and the Sea Nymph, and they run into the pirates of the Cape Fear River.
So it was actually Charleston that took that initiative.
I
was wondering if it was just like, they're close by. So
he
they just parked in Charleston.
He happened upon here.
Where's the closest place to hang a pirate? That's what I was wondering.
No, it was Charlestonians. It was Colonel William Rhett, whose house you can still see down on Hazel Street downtown. And he outfitted the 2 ships himself at his own expense, and they went up. And funny enough, they sailed out of the harbor, and when they sailed the harbor, they ran into another merchant vessel, and the merchant vessel said, look, we just got attacked by Charles Vane. And we heard him say that he's heading south. So they actually went south for a while to try to chase down Charles Vane, couldn't find him, and then went back up north to the Cape Fear River. So Charleston was hopping with pirates during this period.
I'll say. Yeah, and Charles Vane was pretty famous. We can talk about him in another podcast probably. But so they got the gentleman.
They got the gentleman. Yeah, they had
brought him back here.
The most bizarre sea battle you can imagine is called the Battle of the Sandbars. So the Henry and the Sea Nymph, the 2 Charlestonian ships, they entered into the Cape Fear River, and They make their way up the Cape Fear River. The pirates, of course, see these masts above the tree line, and they decide they're going to try to run past them. So as the Sea Nymph and the Henry are coming to the Cape Fear River, they both run aground. So the pirates see their chance to make a run for it and go past them. But unfortunately, the pirate ship also runs aground. And the way that they've run
needs to do something about that river,
yeah,
man.
For sure, yeah.
Lord.
But the way that they had run aground, their cannons were angled down on one side and up on the other, so they couldn't range them to fire at each other.
Oh my heavens!
Right,
like mortar
I heard
rounds.
about this. That's amazing. It is so cool. Yeah.
So they basically just yelled at each other and make dirty jokes at one another. They take shots at one another with small arms,
just waiting for the tide.
Yeah. And they knew whoever got off the bottom first was going to win. And unfortunately for the pirates, it turned out that the Henry got off first, and they swoop in, they capture, and sure enough, they've got Stede Bonnet. And,
so was he part of the White Point hangings, or is that a separate?
No, that he was. So he and 33 crew that survived the Battle of the Sandbars are brought back to Charleston. 4 pirates were found not guilty. They were able to prove that they were forced into piracy. Oftentimes when a pirate would attack a ship, they would give the crew of that vessel the choice. Do you want to be marooned on an island, or would you just join us? And it's kind of a no-brainer. I guess I'm a pirate now. So 4 were able to prove that they were forced into it, but 29 were found guilty, and then plus Stede and hanged at White Point Garden.
Dang.
Yeah, White Point Gardens is a great tourist spot here in Charleston, right by the Battery, at the Inn of King,
is
and
it
a meeting.
Been saying that literally after we just talked about something?
It's lovely. I mean, we want to encourage all of our tourist friends to visit that. There is a marker there, right?
There is a marker there, because there was another pirate who actually was attacked and fought in the harbor. That his crew, the ones that survived, were also brought back at the same time as Stede was in jail. They were tried and also hanged. So
didn't they hang someone at Castle Pinckney?
There was hangings at Castle Pinckney.
Okay,
too.
Kind of like, hey, watch your ass when you're over here.
Yeah.
So, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Just to be able to expound upon this, and the history is so amazing, especially since we're Charleston centered. Yeah. I hope we can get back on here and talk. God, how many we can just scratch the surface with Vane and
Bonnie.
Certainly,
Bonnie.
And she was around this area too. And I would really,
I think she spent her early life in Charleston for
she's definitely her Cormac, I believe, was the name of her family. Yeah. And there's some evidence that the Pink House, which is possibly the oldest residential home in downtown Charleston, which is also on Hazel Street, was owned by her father.
Oh wow. Cool. So some Irish people owned that.
Yeah. So we've talked about a little bit about Edgar, talked about piracy. Let's settle back to yourself. Are you still doing tours and stuff?
I do some walking tours. I don't have a set schedule or a set tour, but sometimes people who've read my books will reach out to me and say, hey, look, I'm going to be in Charleston this week. Do you think we could do a little walking tour? And, if their interest is Edgar Allan Poe, we'll do Edgar Allan Poe stuff, pirates, or if it's just general history. So I do that, and I'm thinking about dipping my toe back into doing some boat tours. I just got my license renewed and had a Coast Guard inspection, so I think I might.
You may as well.
I don't know that my wife loves that idea, but I might do it. I enjoyed it when I did them. So
I was going to ask, how hard is it to drive a boat while you're wearing an eye patch? By the way, do they expect the eye patch? Or?
They do. Yeah. I actually one summer I went in with Sandlapper Tours, which is a bigger tour boat company, and I had this talking pirate. It was like a Halloween thing, and I would take him with me, and the kids loved it.
Of course they would. I mean, that's a great idea. So that's pretty cool. So more pirate stuff down the road. Definitely want to pick your brain. You got the Edgar Allan Poe book. When do you think we'll see that?
The Edgar Allan Poe.
You said you were writing some on Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh no, that one already came out. So that was my third book. Yeah, that was my third book. So Edgar was here 1827, 1828. He arrived here with the army under a false name. He listed as Edgar A. Perry. He spent 13 months here in Charleston at Fort Moultrie. He was escaping from some debt collectors. He had some gambling debts, but Yeah. Edgar never spoke about his time in Charleston his entire life. He kept it hidden. It wasn't until 1888 that anyone discovered the fact that Edgar A. Perry was, in fact, Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, wow.
But, he does use Charleston as the setting for the Gold Bug, which is a pirate treasure hunt. Yeah, there's a lot of fun Edgar stuff. Annabel Lee, which is my favorite Edgar Allan Poe poem, which you might know. There was in the newspaper in 1807, there was a poem that someone who lived in Charleston had written in. They would post in the newspaper poems that people would write in. So, amateur poets would write poems and they would put them in the newspaper. So in 1807, there was a poem that was called The Mourner, and it was written by a guy who's only signed it as the initials DMC. And it's about... He had a girlfriend named Anna who had died. And if you read that poem is the poem Annabel Lee. It is identical rhythm. It's the same theme. It's amazing how much it is like Annabel Lee. Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe didn't come out until 1849.
Okay.
So we feel pretty strongly that Edgar, when he was here in Charleston, saw that poem, kept it in his brain or wrote it down, and then remade it to make the poem
was inspired by that. Okay.
Because his mother and father both were actors here in Charleston, and probably when he was here, his mother was a very famous actress, and his father's actually the first time he performed on stage was here in Charleston. There was a theater on Broad Street that he first performed in, but his mother was a really great actress. She died very young, and when Edgar was 3, and then he got adopted by the Allan family, which is where he gets Allan. Before that, he was just Edgar Poe.
Right.
But it looks like when he was here during his time, he was probably doing research to find information about his parents and came across this poem, because that poem is on one page, and on the next page of the newspaper is an advertisement for a play starring his mother.
Wow.
Wow. So, that is happenstance or serendipity or whatever that is. So
it's pretty wild. It's a pretty amazing connection. And then, there's also the famous story that the real Annabel Lee is buried in the Unitarian Church here in Charleston. So there's that legend. So the book talks a lot about that, but particularly the Gold Bug, which was set here in Charleston. And
the namesake island here, or the island that's right outside of Sullivan's.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, well, that's very interesting. So what are the names of your 3 books?
So there's 4. So the first one was Stede Bonnet, Charleston's Gentleman Pirate. And then the second one was Charleston in the Golden Age of Piracy. And then we have Edgar Allan Poe's Charleston. And then my last book was A History Lover's Guide to Charleston, which is, it's kind of for tourists, but it is basically 100 sites in and around Charleston, mostly set in downtown Charleston, but also the surrounding areas. But 100 different sites, kind of the history of each one.
Right.
There's some maps to help you get around and find them. And that was my last one. And,
anything else or upcoming that
I have some ideas. I'm not immediately working on anything. I've become really interested in blockade running recently. So I don't know, maybe if that's on the table. I'd like to do something maybe about Charleston Harbor, maybe, kind of a perspective of the history of Charleston Harbor from prehistoric to today.
Sure.
And all the history and things like that.
Wall, the Charleston Wall or something. So just quickly before we go. Golden Age of Piracy. What are the, I guess, agreed upon dates of what that was?
More or less, we call it the first quarter of the 18th century. So 1700 to 1725.
Okay, right.
So here in Charleston, we hang nearly 50 pirates in the fall of 1718. So when you're walking around White Point Garden to the battery there, just know you're walking on top of at least 50 dead pirates.
Yeah, that would make a case for the golden age of the piracy death, at least.
Yeah. And then the early 1720s, there was some mass hanging of pirates in Nassau. That kind of signaled the beginning of the end of the golden age of piracy. Blackbeard was killed in North Carolina at Ocracoke in the fall of 1718 as well. So that kind of period was kind of the beginning of the end of the golden age of piracy.
Okay. Well, hopefully we can have you back on to talk some history and whatnot. DJ, do you have any saved rounds?
No, this has been fascinating. So I've been enjoying it. Yeah.
So anyway, we want to thank Captain Byrd and I will call you by your stage name.
Any social media or anything? Website?
I do have a website. It's Captain Byrd's with an S because Captain Byrd was not available, but Captain Byrd's with an S and Byrd is spelled with a Y. So BYRDS.com. That's my website. And then I have an Instagram page that I post some stuff on when I have signings or lectures or things like that. But the best way is to go to the website. And you can buy my books on the website as well directly. So.
Oh, great. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and share that in the show notes and in our social media. I want to say thank you for stopping by with the Shrimp City Report this week. We'll see you next week. Thanks.
Bye.